Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second meeting of our Committee on Infrastructure. Today is February 25th, Monday. Let the record reflect that we are joined by our Vice Chair, Sherry Leitner, and Councilmember Scott Sherman. Welcome to my colleagues. We have been advised by Councilmember Emerald that she will be late today, so she will join us later. I'd just like to thank the members of the public for joining us today or watching on City TV. I'll say this often, but this committee really is all about the public, the citizens of our great city, and working together to rebuild San Diego. In fact, as you'll note on today's agenda, there's a special item for community input on infrastructure needs and priorities. As I stated in our work plan and at the last committee meeting, which was our first committee meeting, we take our responsibility to listen to the community very seriously, and it's my expectation that having a standing item on the agenda for you, the public, to provide input reflects that commitment. It's only the first step for engaging the community, with many more to come. Now, if you are here to speak on an item that is not on the agenda and are trying to decide whether the issue is a non-agenda issue or more appropriate as a community input issue, think of it this way. If you wish to speak on a project, a need, a general infrastructure concern, your issue falls under the community input item. If you'd like to speak on anything else, your opportunity to address this committee is during non-agenda public comment. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our City Attorney Representative, Tom Zeleny, our IBA Representative, Aaron Noel, and Francisco Estrada from the Mayor's Office, as well as my trusted committee consultant, Almas Udris. Getting San Diego to a 5-year infrastructure plan involves many moving pieces, and today we take the next step. Specifically, as identified by Section 2 of our work plan, and our first two items on the agenda, we'll be doing a deep dive on the subject of asset management and what we are doing as a city to get to a comprehensive vision and system in place for making sure that we keep track of our assets, maintain them, and where necessary, rebuild them. Consistent with Section 3 of our work plan, during Item 3 of our agenda, we'll review last year's efforts by the city to gather community input through the 42 community planning groups and the Community Planners Committee, also known as CPC. And lastly, in line with Sections 1, 2, and 5 of the work plan, we'll be receiving an update on one of the city's existing multi-year infrastructure finance plans, the plan to address deferred capital in primarily 3 large asset classes: streets, storm drains, and facilities. And we'll be taking action on staff's recommendation for reprogramming what little funding remains from the first deferred capital bond the city issued back in 2009. With that, we'll begin with non-agenda public comment. I'd like to remind the public that each speaker has 3 minutes to speak. I see we have one speaker here today, Mr. James Gartland. Sir, come on up. Good morning. You have 3 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you guys for your audience today. I appreciate it. My name is James Gartland. I'm with the California Teamsters, the San Diego Life Saving Association.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments. Moving on to our inaugural standing item regarding community input on infrastructure needs and priorities. Speakers will have 3 minutes each. We have one, Ms. Ann, I'm going to pronounce her last name wrong, I'm sure, is it Fage?
It's Ann Fagey, and I chair the City of San Diego's Community Forest Advisory Board. So I would like to just briefly add the thought that we have an asset that's listed in your really great strategy document is missing is trees. Trees are assets that we have in our city. We currently have 212,000 trees in our current inventory, and I know that's an underestimate. But even those trees alone provide 5 million kilowatt-hour energy savings a year, which is $800,000 worth. They clean up 32,000 pounds of air pollutants, which is $1.7 million worth. And they sequester 5,000 additional metric tons of carbon a year. So they're assets in terms of what they provide to the community as well. Those were the financial side. I should have started with they provide shade, they reduce energy use. They really, when we do walkability surveys, the Walk San Diego, trees are a big part of being walkable, livable. We like to sit in a cafe that's on a shade-lined street. It draws business there. Captures stormwater. Protects, interestingly enough, asphalt lasts a lot longer when it's protected by trees in a shade. So it's an important element in our city's infrastructure, and in the next presentation, I'll be thinking about how we could frame trees, or how trees are actually an asset, and we do the same steps that we would do for other assets. It's also the only asset that appreciates with time. You put in a trailer or a lifeguard station, and it declines. A tree, you put in a much lower initial cost, and it appreciates with time. We can cover a number of these issues if you would invite us to give a presentation to this committee. We'd really appreciate that, and talk about how trees are assets and how they're managed. The city staff and the Community Forest Advisory Board has state funding to do an urban forest management plan, and it's going to address the issues that you have on the strategy or the task force piece. We already have pulled together current conditions. We already have asset management policies. We have pretty good policies and regulations in San Diego. It's a matter of actually implementing them. So our forest management plan will actually address engaging the community, setting acceptable service levels and performance measures, and prioritizing needs and projects. And we know there's some sticky issues with sidewalks, and that has to do with putting the right tree in the right place. We have some we're way behind. So as we do sidewalks and street maintenance, when we put trees in, let's make sure we do really good choice of those trees and provide quality stock. And that'll be about oversight of the city's contracts, which is another issue. But thank you for the opportunity just to raise the issue, and we look forward to having trees listed as an asset for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate those comments, and I'll be speaking with my colleague, Mr. Alvarez, who's the chairman of our Natural Resources and Culture Committee, about that issue, see ways to collaborate on that. So that concludes our non-agenda public comment, as well as our infrastructure priorities community comment sections of the agenda. Would any member of our committee care to make any comments at this time? You would? Leitner.
I appreciated Mr. Gartland coming down and speaking to the lifeguard stations and the situation there with the lifeguards. I know it's been very frustrating for especially my community in trying to get the lifeguard stations actually built. It has been something that funding has been taken from them in the past, and they've been long delayed, to the point that we actually had to take one of the lifeguard stations completely through the approval process again to hopefully that one will be online soon, and I have hope springs eternal for the Children's Pool Lifeguard Station in the Cove as well. So I will put down those other items you mentioned about the trailers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Leitner. Do we have any comment from our city attorney, IBA, or mayoral staff? Seeing none. We will move on to the adoption agenda with the approval of the minutes of our January 28th meeting. Those will stand as approved as distributed unless there are any objections from the committee. Hearing and seeing no objections, we will move on to the meat of our agenda today, which we have a really full agenda again, which happens when we only meet once a month. I'd be happy to meet once a week, but I might be the only person here. So we'll keep going through this. If it's okay with my colleagues, we have no consent items, so if it's okay with my colleagues, I'd like to take item 6 out of order. Should be a fairly quick item, which is an item brought to us by our staff at the DSD, Development Services Department Facilities Financing Division, to approve a reimbursement agreement with Scripps Mesa Developers, LLC, for the construction of Mira Mesa Boulevard median, Mira Mesa Boulevard and Hybert Street traffic signal, as well as Irma Road improvements in the Scripps Miramar Ranch community. You guys have any problems with taking that out of order?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you both. I see we have our staff on hand. How much time do you need for your presentation? Very good.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Angela Abeda. I'm Project Manager in Development Services, Facilities Financing Division. And I have up here with me Tom Tomlinson, our Deputy Director, and John Chicana, Supervising Analyst in Facilities Financing. And I'm here today to talk about the reimbursement agreement with Scripps Mesa Developers. It's a reimbursement agreement to provide partial reimbursement for the construction of a raised median on Mira Mesa Boulevard between the I-15 and Scripps Ranch Boulevard, a traffic signal at Mira Mesa Boulevard and Hybert Street, and improvements at Scripps Ranch Boulevard and Irma Road. And this agreement came about as part of the approval process for the Casa Mira View development project in Mira Mesa. The developer of that project, Scripps Mesa Developers, met with the Scripps Ranch Planning Group and city staff throughout the process in order to determine the most efficient plan for improving traffic circulation and the level of service at the intersection of Mira Mesa Boulevard and Scripps Ranch Boulevard. The median project on Mira Mesa Boulevard is included, as well as the other improvements, are included in the Scripps Miramar Ranch Public Facilities Financing Plan. And the reimbursement to Scripps Mesa Developers will include a portion of FBA funds as well as developer funds collected by the city for the median and the related improvements, which are the subject of the agreement. The estimated cost of the improvements, the total cost, is estimated at a little over $740,000, which will be advanced by the developer. This reimbursement agreement will allow Scripps Mesa Developers to seek partial reimbursement in the amount of $368,000 in FBA funds and other developer funds collected and budgeted for the construction of the improvements covered by the agreement. Scripps Mesa Developers plans to advertise and open bids within 90 days of the approval of this agreement, and construction is estimated to take a year. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker on this item, Mr. John Leppert of Leppert Engineering Corp. Sir, did you want to speak, or do you just want to be available for questions if anybody has them?
Available for questions if you might have.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Okay, we'll go on to committee comments and questions. Ms. Leitner.
I actually have no comments. I would like to move the item, staff recommendation, with the proviso that the reimbursement agreement be submitted with the docket when it comes to council. And I think the improvements are long overdue.
Great. We have a motion and a second. I'll just say real quickly that this project on paper may seem small. Median traffic signal improvements to allow for northbound U-turns, the intersection of Scripps Ranch and Irma in my district. This is an infrastructure project in District 5 that has been long desired by the community and will improve circulation along Mira Mesa Boulevard between the 15 and Scripps Ranch Boulevard. And just to clarify real quickly, you said that construction will start when?
The advertising and bids were within 90 days. Maybe John Leppert can be more specific as to when the construction will start.
Mr. Leppert?
We're hopeful that we can start construction this summer.
This summer.
As soon as we can complete the bidding process.
Okay, construction starting this summer. Love it. Okay, well, I just want to thank the Scripps Mesa developers for following through on their commitment, working with the Scripps Ranch Planning Group, and I'd also like to thank city staff for your efforts to bring this item forward to this committee today. So we have a motion and a second by Ms. Leitner to approve this item. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Carries unanimously with Ms. Emerald absent. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. So now we'll move on to items 1 and 2 in our agenda. We have presentation from GHD regarding asset management, 5 core questions, and presentation from Public Works Department, Public Utilities Department, and Transportation and Stormwater Department regarding Enterprise Asset Management Steering Committee. Both of these items are companion items, 1 and 2. 1 addresses asset management generally, and item 2 discusses how the city is currently moving forward on asset management. So unless there's objection from my colleagues, I would recommend that we hear both items consecutively and then open up the floor for comments and questions on both items. Is that okay? Very good. Before we get into the details of this topic, I'd just like to briefly remind committee members and the public that Section 2 of the work plan that this committee adopted last month talks about a need for comprehensive asset management at the city. With comprehensive asset management in place, the city could plan its condition assessments, map the life of our assets, and better project annual and ongoing maintenance needs. We need to identify our one-time needs to get us back to acceptable service levels and then ensure that we're budgeting enough annually to maintain our infrastructure at those same service levels. Here to give us a primer on 5 key questions regarding asset management is Colin Chung, whose firm has done some work for the city in the past, and we appreciate him being here today, willing to share his expertise this morning. And I also see Gene Matter here from Transportation and Stormwater Department to introduce Colin. Gentlemen, how much time will you need for your presentation?
15 minutes, sir.
15 minutes?
15 minutes.
Is that okay? Okay, very good. Please proceed.
Well, hello, committee members. Like I said, I'm Gene Matter with the Transportation and Stormwater Department and also the co-chair of the city's Enterprise Asset Management Steering Committee. I want to introduce Colin Chung, a consultant from the firm GHD. From research to application, Colin has been involved with asset management for many years, over 15 years. Today, Colin is actively engaged in the advancement of asset management. He's involved in various asset management research projects and serves as asset management lead for numerous domestic and international professional organizations. For the past 10 years, Collins has worked in numerous clients across the Americas and Asia. In fact, several years ago, he assisted public utilities in some asset management tasks, and he's currently assisting the Stormwater Division in developing its first asset management plan. Before I turn the presentation over to Colin, I'd like to thank him for traveling to San Diego and giving his own time to the committee today. Thank you, Colin.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Gene. And thank you very much for allowing me to come here and speak on my passion, asset management. I've lost a lot of hairs doing with the asset management, so I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. So thank you very much, sir. Well, I'm going to try to frame asset management at a very high level in a very quick way. And first, develop a definition. And from an asset management, managing assets to minimize lifecycle cost of ownership while delivering the level of service and acceptable risk is a formal asset management definition that's been created. But it's a little difficult to comprehend, so I'm going to try to break it down. It's about moving from a reactive to a proactive through managed solutions. It's about working together, trying to get the best bang for the buck, minimizing the risk, maximizing the limited resources, and understanding the long-range capital investment needs. It's about creating and collaborating consistent decision-making platform backed by justification and documentation. If that's all very difficult to understand, then it's about making the right decision at the right time for the right reason at the right cost. And I think we all understand that very, very well. So GHD's been working with the U.S. EPA in creating an asset management framework, and for about 8 years we've been training the U.S. government as well as various municipalities on asset management. And during this process, we've broken asset management down into the 5 core questions. On your desk, you'll see a stress ball, not a ball, but a cube, in which you could follow along the 5 core questions of asset management. You could squeeze it, throw at me, whatever you need to do to follow along here. The first questions of asset management. What is the current state of my assets? What do I own? What do I manage? What kind of state are they in? We need to set the basis. We need to set the foundation. We need to understand what we have, what we manage, before we could start thinking about what we need for it. The second, once we understand what we know, what we own, and what we manage, we're going to try to document what are we supposed to do with this asset? What service levels have we committed? What have we decided we're going to deliver to our customers, to the regulators? Third, once we understand what we own, what we manage, understand what we need to do with it, third is we need to start prioritizing. We just don't have enough resources and funding need to do everything all at once. If that's the case, then we're not going to need asset management. So we need to help prioritize. How do we prioritize? We prioritize by criticality, risk, and I'm going to touch up on that. Lastly, is once we understand which assets are critical and which are not critical, we're going to start developing the best O&M, operations and maintenance, and CIP investment strategies, and from there develop what is the best long-term funding strategy. So I'm going to kind of fly through this, so if you kind of come along with me on that, would be great. So the first question, what is the current state of my asset? What we're trying to do here is understand what we own and what we manage. As you can see from the figure here, here's an example of all the pipes for a city based on the size, based on the material, and how many miles of pipe, how many miles of what DIP, PVC, and you really, really break it down by each of the segment. We want to have that kind of database to help drive the asset management decisions. Here's another graph where it shows pipes based on the manholes or the lift stations, the order stations, the buffer tanks, the air vac PIFs. We're trying to understand what we own and what we manage and document that in a database. Once we have that, we try to answer the question, what is the current state of my assets? When you look at that, we develop what's called an installation profile, in which for every asset in the database, we create when was it installed, and we map that out for the whole decade of when it was installed. And you will see a graph like this on the screen here, which represents the installation pattern of the infrastructure. And typically, it will mimic the construction cycle of the city in which it was developed. From there, we dig into a little deeper, and we start looking at what is the current state of my asset. Here's an example of a map in which it was created using the condition assessment data to highlight which assets are in poor condition, which are in good condition. This is for the wastewater network. And here's one for the lift stations, where all the lift stations were represented in a very simple red, yellow, and green perspective to help us understand where we're going to start needing to focus the capital investment needs are. As you can see, towards the right, the lift station 329 and beyond are in excellent shape. What we're seeing is the lift stations on the left is starting to need some investment in the future. Once you have that, then you flip that back and you start looking at the consumption profile. You understand when these were installed, but more importantly, you start looking at how much of this is consumed. What you want to see is graphs on the left and not on the right. You also answer the question, how much are the assets that I own and manage? What's the total valuation of it? You look at it from a very top level, wastewater, water, treatment plants, and then break it down into different more details, the reservoir, the wells, the pump stations, and then all the way down into, for each of the treatment plant, the process level and various process associated with that. So once we understand what we own and what we manage, we document that, and we start defining what are we committed on delivering with this service. We develop an asset management framework which starts out at the very top, the mission, which is about you guys. What do you want to do with your infrastructure? That is the mission. And from there, we establish the goals, the objectives, and the level of service, the KPIs in which you're going to track the progress of achieving the overarching mission of the Infrastructure Committee. What we want to do is all the CIP investment dollars that we invest are aligning towards meeting the overarching mission and the goals and objectives that's been created. And that's the alignment that we're talking about in asset management. Here's an example where the mission is to protect the health and environment through an effective, sustainable utility system. Okay? What a goal of that might be to provide high customer satisfaction. The objectives might be maintain water quality, water system reliability, emergency response time. And from there, you develop KPIs, a level of service to help track performance of the delivery of the service. With the level of service, the key to asset management becomes the critical, which assets are critical to sustain performance. In asset management, we look at criticality or risk from a perspective of three components. One is probability of failure. How likely will this asset fail? But more importantly is from a consequence of failure. What is the impact of this asset when it does fail? And through that, we establish and help prioritize which assets are more critical than the other. Here is a risk profile that's been created for a wastewater system in which you could start helping understand which assets are critical in where those assets are. Now, on the flip side, on the consequence of failure, we could quickly realize where the critical assets are and where you can afford to have failure and where you absolutely cannot afford to have failure. And here's a map that would describes that consequence of failure results. And when you put it together, it's what we call risk profile, where you have the probability of failure, the timing to failure, and the consequence of failure, the impact of failure. Once you have these information, then you put it through and understand what is my best management strategy moving forward. How do I optimize it? You optimize it using risk. A risk-based strategy, as you can see on this graph here, where one side you have the probability of failure, and on the x-axis you have the consequence of failure. And you'll have your assets in various different zones as represented in this particular graph. And you set different management strategies in which how you will attack or how you will invest into these assets. Obviously, the assets that fall under the red zone will be the first one that you would invest in through more aggressive or through repair and renewal. And perhaps in the low risk zone, perhaps you might consider that it may be appropriate to manage to failure on those particular assets because the consequence of failure is very, very low. When you put it all together for every asset in the infrastructure, for every year, you're going to need some investment decision. And we have helped develop a long-range investment needs, such as this particular graph. And the modeling then projects that in this particular case that we're going to need about $76 million a year in order to sustain the infrastructure for the next 100 years. The reality is, typically, that is not the case. So we need to deal with amount of backlog. So how do you create and manage this balance? Well, through risk. So we developed some funding scenario in which we represent if you do nothing and keep the rate at the same rate, what is the impact with against the risk and the backlog work that gets generated? And here's a graph that shows you that if do nothing scenario. But in this particular example, we said, what if we keep it fixed for the 5 years and ramp it up $3 million for the next 10 years? What kind of impact will that have in terms of the backlog and the risk? And here's an example of what that impact will look like. Ultimately, what we want to do is create various different funding scenarios that allows us to balance the amount of workload or the work backlog and the risk that we're willing to take on that. It's about developing and understanding the exact needs of each of the assets for year by year, asset by asset, and for each of the assets, what the rehabilitation or replacement cost will be, and best of all, as represented in that red square there, that each of the assets has a risk score in which you could use to prioritize which actions need to be taken before the other. Asset management is about moving away from reactive to proactive. The budget's not based on last year, but the budgets are being based on the future needs of the asset. You're investing money and maximizing the risk reduction is what asset management is trying to go. So that was a very quick fly-through of the asset management framework summarized within the 5 core questions of asset management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chung. We appreciate your presentation, and I think your perspective of getting into a position where we're being proactive rather than reactive is exactly what this committee is aiming to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see Mr. Sherman's on the lights. Mr. Sherman, did you have a question right now, or do you want to take the next presentation and then tie them together? Up to you.
No, we'll take them together.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Chung. Thank you, Mr. Matter. Item 2, as I said before, ties into item 1, and we asked this group, as our next presenters are coming forward, we asked this group to talk to us about efforts the city is taking on asset management. From our conversations with staff, it looks like this steering committee is in place at just the right time, and we're looking forward to having you at this committee as often as necessary. My understanding is that the steering committee is made up of our city's asset-owning departments, and their task is to develop a way for the entire city to speak the same language when it comes to infrastructure. Mr. Heinrichs, welcome. It's always good to see you. And you are here to kick off this part of the discussion. How much time will you need for your presentation?
I think we'll probably need about 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair
you.
Kersey and members of the Infrastructure Committee. I'm Tony Heinrichs, the Public Works Director, and we're here today to present an information item that will describe the function of the city's Enterprise Asset Management Steering Committee. And right off the bat, I would just like to comment that Colin's presentation really set a high bar. That's where the city ought to be. And so it was actually good that he went first because, everyone can now understand, hopefully, that we have a long road ahead of us in terms of our process improvements to improve our infrastructure. Today with me is Susan Bowman from the Public Utilities Department and Gene Matter from the Transportation and Stormwater Department. I am the executive sponsor of the Enterprise Asset Management Steering Committee. Susan and Gene are going to go through the presentation. But first of all, I'd just like to mention that to avoid confusion, we have 2 separate but related efforts underway talking about asset management. This EAM Asset Management Steering Committee actually was formed about 3 years ago, and it was comprised mostly of representatives from the general funded departments. We do have some enterprise department representatives on this committee, and it was meant to be a citywide effort to try to get our arms around the information that we have in the various departments in terms of asset management. We also have a separate initiative underway called the SAP EAM initiative, and there is a commonality of terms in the 2 different titles. But that's led by the Public Utilities Department, and they have a leadership role in a citywide implementation of an enterprise asset management solution using the SAP financial system that we have here at the city. The EAM Steering Committee has been working with this other committee for quite some time in terms of exchanging ideas and information. And it's our collective recommendation that as we move forward in our pursuit of asset management that we hitch our horses to this wagon, the SAP EAM initiative led by Public Utilities. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Susan.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having us today. We're very excited to share with you the efforts that we've taken on for the last few years and where we're going in the future. I'm Susan Bowman, and this is Gene. I'll start with giving you a little bit of background, following on with what Colin said about asset management and our approach to asset management. Asset management, as Colin explained, it's really a best business practice. And within that best business practice, we think of it as a framework for managing our assets. And the committee has worked toward focusing on developing that business practice framework
It covers an extended time horizon, and it's really a way to manage things internally. It is comprehensive and a continuous process focused on assessing the value and the condition of our assets, again with the goal of minimizing the total cost of ownership and still providing the required level of service as we've defined that. An effective program, from our perspective, it integrates the disciplines of economics, engineering, maintenance, operations, and information technology, working together to build and maintain sustainable assets. Again, a little bit of background on best business practice of asset management. As Colin mentioned, there are 5 core questions, and often within a method for achieving the answer to those 5 core questions is to follow a 10-step process. It builds the business through the initial phases of just gathering information on your assets all the way to a fully mature asset management plan from which the business can move forward. This concept is how we bring all of this together in an enhanced way and to make it a more formal approach to asset management. It represents a fully matured business practice. And as Tony mentioned, in a companion to the business practice of asset management is a software solution. Certainly, as Colin mentioned, there's a lot of information and data that goes into having the knowledge that you need to make good decisions and to actually follow along with those business practices. So from our perspective, we see that as being the SAP EAM solution. What this graphic represents is some of the aspects that go into SAP EAM as a software solution. Certainly the inventory of your assets, the condition assessment of your assets, the integration with a GIS system. Certainly at a core, the SAP EAM solution is a work order. Our assets at a minimum, we're maintaining them. And the cost of maintaining and replacing and renewing those assets needs to be captured so that we can see what costs are involved with replacing them going forward. The CIP planning, et cetera, all of that should be incorporated into the SAP EAM solution with an integration into the existing ERP solution that the city's already put in place, both the customer care solution as well as the larger FILO implementation, so that all of the information that we have on our assets from the conception of putting in an asset and planning the project all the way through capitalization, turning it into a fixed asset, et cetera, that's all contained in a single system. We're all working from the same base knowledge going forward. Public utilities, again, we are taking the lead on that effort. We are building the cornerstone for the city. We're partnering with the Department of IT, and we will be embarking on that project soon. So again, I just want to make it clear that we have 2 sides of a coin here. We have a best business practice and the software solution that we are moving forward on. Now I'm going to turn it over to Gene, and he's going to give you a little bit more detail about the actual workings of the EAM steering committee.
Thank you, Susan. Well, as Tony mentioned before, this steering committee was started several years ago to really bring all the asset managers or all the asset owners together within the city so that we can speak a common language. One of the first things we did was to embark on a vision statement. Our goal as a committee is to standardize our approach to asset management. One original driver for the establishment of the committee was to share ideas and business practices with the goal of moving toward consistency in our approach to managing our assets. This is reflected in our word one being capitalized. We really want to emphasize one as we work together as a group. Another early task for the committee was to determine its mission statement. A key point to the mission statement is framework. The committee is not tasked with developing a single asset management plan for all assets. That responsibility is still with each asset owner department. Instead, the committee is working to establish a framework which will be a guide for each department that manages assets in a way it can be integrated with other assets in a standard way across the city. Excuse me. This committee was formed in 2010 under the direction of the Public Works Deputy Chief. Through a multifaceted approach, the intention is to improve utilization and performance of existing assets, extend asset life, reduce capital costs, and to overall improve the management of our assets. Now, the structure or the membership of the committee, it's comprised of several departments. We have Public Works, Facilities, Fleet, Transportation and Stormwater, myself, Public Utilities, Environmental Services, Fire Rescue, Police Department, Development Services, Disability Services, Comptrollers. There's a whole gamut of city departments involved. This committee is comprised of various staff representatives from asset-responsible departments. Membership is not based on a specific classification, but by those who have been identified as the best representative to speak to asset management practices for their department. The staff levels vary from deputy directors to analysts to engineers. The committee has 2 co-chairs to facilitate the meetings and to help craft the agenda under the guidance of the Public Works Director. The committee has a seat on the CIPRAC, the CIP Review and Advisory Committee. The members are serving on this committee as part of their general responsibilities, but are all committed to the principles of asset management and the benefits it can bring to the city. Since its inception in 2010, the committee has developed a vision and mission statement for the asset management in the city. We've documented through a process flow chart how the city obtains its asset infrastructure. We've developed a list of all types of assets the city owns. This is not an inventory of every asset owned, but just a list of all types as varied as boats or streetlights. Recently, the committee developed for CIPRAC to review a proposed asset management policy statement to be used by city departments when developing their asset management plans. I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
To give you an idea of our upcoming activities, our next chore is to, not a chore, our pleasure. We're going to be developing a framework for the asset management plans, a sort of a process narrative, so that, as Jean mentioned, as we go forward, we're really focused on standardization. We are all at different levels of maturity with asset management, but we can all agree on the best way to go forward as we're able to improve our asset management processes. We're also planning to develop new unified asset data acquisition processes. We have documented the existing process, and we want to look forward to improving those processes and having a unified methodology. And again, just to reiterate again, we are working on the SAP EAM project. The goal, or the purpose of, the role, I should say, of the EAM Steering Committee on the SAP project is to really act as an information sharing opportunity for us to keep all of the departments apprised of the efforts that are being done with that project, and to encourage their involvement as we go forward, so that as we build the SAP project, it incorporates all of the needs and concerns of the asset responsible departments. And in conclusion, we just like to say that we welcome the attention that's being given to the maintenance and replacement of our infrastructure, and we really do look forward to working with this infrastructure committee in the future. My colleagues and I are always available to answer questions, and we certainly appreciate the support of our executive sponsor, Tony Henricks. Thank you.
And thank all of you. We appreciate your perspectives and your time here this morning. This is very, very useful information. Before we get to our committee questions, just a quick question to the steering committee. I may have some more questions later, but I just have one right now. On slide 3, I was very interested in that, asking whether there is a tentative timeline for moving through that sequence of steps, and if you could share that with the committee.
We haven't established a timeline as a committee. Really, it's dependent on every department to be able to dedicate the resources and the time that it takes to get through these steps. Certainly, we have a goal of doing the asset registry, that we have the beginnings of that, knowing that we have what type of assets we have. And I think as we move forward with the SAP project, it'll give a foundation for departments to be able to come in and more readily be able to accomplish some of these steps as we go forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let us know how we can help as a committee as well, if we can. Okay, we'll go to committee questions and comments. We have Mr. Sherman.
Yeah, just a couple quick things here. I really like what I've heard here today so far. And Colin, thank you for the 30,000-foot level view of asset management. You know, and if you think asset management impedes hair follicle growth, try politics. But with that being said, I'm from the private sector. You know, my father had a property management company. I'm from the insurance world, which also deals with asset management. This is stuff that some people consider mundane, but it's right up my alley. With that being said, I'd really like to make a motion at this time to have the staff and the committee consultant, the IBA, all work together and come back to this committee within 60 days with some type of policy that we could bring forth to the council to see if we can get an actual policy put in place here. So if 60 days works for you, I'd like to see it as soon as possible. That way we can try and get 2014 taken care of.
Great. We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Ms. Leitner, would you like to comment? Question?
Yes, I do have some questions and comments, and my first comment was for the IBA. Do you have any comments on what has been presented thus far today, and then the mayor's office?
I know I've been talking about the EAM steering committee for quite a while and appreciating the work that they've been doing over the past 3 years. It's really been a grassroots effort, you know, more than being directed from the top, and makes it very impressive that all of these asset managers have gotten together and recognized the value of this. I know that Jean mentioned that each department, it's up to each department to be doing their own asset management plans, and that everyone's sort of on their own timeline based on the resources. But I just had a question about whether or not there would be a value in having a citywide asset management plan.
Well, certainly each asset management plan should be tailored so that it can interact with others, and that's the goal of the EAM committee, is to provide a framework so that when they do compile their asset management plan, it can dovetail in with existing plans.
And I'd like to add another comment. I believe that's really the vision of the second effort that I spoke about that's being led by the Public Utilities Department. We really do need a citywide asset management policy and a strategy. We believe that the effort being led by the Public Utilities Department is the best vehicle to get us there. They have offered to have other general fund departments participate in that planning effort. And it's going to take quite a lot of resources and quite a bit of time to actually put this together. But it is worthwhile, in my opinion, to work on this project, because if we're really serious about making risk-based decisions about our assets and making the proper levels of capital and O&M resources in our assets, then we really do need to have a citywide strategy.
I do have a few questions. With respect to the first presentation we saw, is there a report associated with that PowerPoint?
No, there was no report. It was just a
because
presentation.
I note the scenarios, it was not possible to understand what the scenarios meant that were provided in the graphs and the bar charts. Was that based in any way on the City of San Diego, or is that just a presentation as a sample?
I believe those were just a sample of some of the previous work Colin has done, but he can address that.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll be more than glad to share an example of an asset management plan that's out in the public domain that we're allowed to look at and share that with you. So I could forward that over to Jean to be forwarded to you. And that actually has a lot of the graphs that's been there, and then it's got verbiage around that allows to explain what we're trying to do with those graphs and how those graphs can help with the decision-making process.
And a question with respect to that, was that done for a municipality or was that done for a private business?
It's for a municipality, City of Albuquerque, New York. I mean, New Mexico.
New Mexico.
New York is.
New York is big, but okay. And do you ever get into something that is similar to what Sandag does on their planning, in that they have constrained and unconstrained versions of their investments?
Yes. I mean, we've gone through various examples in like City of Charlotte where it was a citywide approach, and there's numerous constraints that are tied to that. So
I'm talking with Sandaggett's money.
the last example on the presentation about the funding scenario, that was at a request of the general manager of the water and wastewater. And they were under the constraint of rate lockdown for the next 5 years. And he needed to tell the story to the decision maker about the impact of their decisions, but he didn't quite knew how that could be told. So we brainstormed on that and talked about risk and the amount of work backlog based on the data information that we had. So we created various different funding scenarios that allowed them to really grasp what the impact of the decision was. And surprisingly, after the presentation, it was very silent, and then 2 comments came out of it. And first comment was, "What took you so long to create something like this?" And the second comment was, with this information, it would not be good for us to keep the rate structure as is. So as such, we decided to change the rate structure to help promote the infrastructure on that.
Okay. And some of my other questions had already been answered just by your presentation, follow-up presentation, in that, yes, it does seem to be a very data-driven process, and as you, I would like to know what recommendations on type of data and frequency of data gathering. I note that we are planning to do additional data gathering related to some of our facilities and roads, and maybe that's something that can be looked at as well with the current motion on the floor to take a look at what best practices are used elsewhere, and actually what other programs are used elsewhere, given our interaction so far with the SAP system. And I know the customer care solutions, I don't know if that is doing better than it was a year ago or not. But I note that Mr. Kersey did comment on the timeline. I was curious about the timeline for just getting the enterprise resource plan implemented for all of the departments and have them talk to each other. Any ideas?
For the public utilities-led SAP effort, we are looking at a 3-year effort. We're replacing 3 existing maintenance management systems. We're going to be aligning our business practices, bringing those systems together, and based upon the information that we've received from implementers of this type of system, the magnitude that we're looking at with the full integration to the existing ERP environment in the city, that 3-year timeline seems to be an appropriate time frame for us.
Okay, and then do you have any idea on the costs and what this means to the budget?
For the public utilities portion of it, we're estimating about $20 million.
Over the 3 years?
Over the 3 years, yes.
Okay, and then I note a lot of this is about the replacement, rehab of existing infrastructure. What about new infrastructure? Is that going to be included in this going forward with respect to asset management?
Usually, from an asset management perspective, that's determined to be a capacity. So there's both capacity issues and then certainly new development. As we go forward, our program in public utilities would certainly include any developer-provided assets. We include those as we go forward, and they're really just considered part of our effort. As far as planning new projects that might not be based upon a developer input or such, Gene or Tony?
In my opinion, if you have a good asset management program, that should serve as the driver to indicate what new capital projects you may need, because that's all part of the decision-making process. You make your recommendations based on criticality and risk. If an asset is approaching its useful life, that's when you want to start planning for its replacement, so that would generate requirements for new capital projects. But again, the asset management plan should be the driver for all those decisions.
And then I note on PowerPoint slide 10, it says proposed citywide asset management policy statements. Do you have any as yet?
Yes, we have come up with a policy statement that's been presented to SIPRAC for their review. It was in response to the CIP audit, one of their recommendations, and that was completed. And the upcoming effort, which is the Uniform Framework Business Practices, that's recommendation 8 from the CIP audit, and that will be completed and then would be presented to SIPRAC as well. And at your request, directly here to Infrastructure Committee.
So do you want to request both?
You want to put the motion to amend it?
Yeah. I'd like to amend the motion to include both the policy and what you just said.
Practices, business
practices.
Great.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I would be delighted to second the motion.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Leitner. I just have a few questions and comments here, as we do have a motion on the floor. First off, I know that Public Utilities may not be fully prepared to speak to this today, and I don't want to stray too far off our topic here, but with some of the recent high-profile water main breaks over the last week or two, I was curious as to whether you guys or perhaps Colin could briefly comment about the value of asset management in terms of mitigating and perhaps preventing these types of water pipe ruptures.
The recent breaks that occurred, those have already been incorporated into our master plans and the replacement of those pipes, whereas I believe one of them was in construction phase and another was in the design phase. And so in Public Utilities, we have both an asset management plan and master plans that lay out our CIP projects for the future. So both of those have been incorporated. What we look forward to with the completion of a full asset management business practice and solution is to have all of that information readily available and identified so that the public and all can see where we are in those things. But those are available on the, I think it's the IMCAT public-facing website, those particular efforts.
If I may comment on that.
Yes, please.
To further Susan's comment on that. Asset management is a continuous improvement process, and it's unfortunate these failures occur, but that is the reality. However, from an asset management perspective, it provides us with incredible data to help understand the failure pattern and what we call the decay of these pipes. So what we try to do is utilize these condition assessment data and the historical break pattern to help understand and model it back to the assets to help us predict potential timing of these assets' failure. And then we could, once we understand that, we could proactively manage that based on the risk, so that for the water pipes in an area where we absolutely cannot afford failure downtown, going underneath the highway, we would proactively manage it so that we replace that asset before a failure occurs, because the consequent failure cost is going to cost a lot more. And for those assets, perhaps in a cul-de-sac serving 3 homes, priority will be a little lower on the scale, depending on whose home, obviously.
Of course. So if in this case we have, a couple or a few hundred miles of old, 75 to 100-year-old cast iron pipes, you'd be able to, using some of these best practices, identify which of those were most vulnerable based on just their position in the city and have those on a prioritization list for replacement?
Yes, sir. Because we would have the pipe size, we would have the pipe material, we would have the pipe install year, and based on where the pipe was located, we would have the pipe soil type associated with it. Then you could correlate which are the different assets that have the similar data patterns, then start identifying when we might expect failure for those assets based on the initial install cost, initial installation year, and the the pipe material and the surrounding environment that are associated with it. That's the whole proactive nature of the asset management. Once you have that data, then you could use that data to help understand the behavior of your asset and try to manage it before a failure occurs on top of that.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Bowman, do you know how much of that we're doing already? You mentioned that some of this was in the works already. I know the one downtown, the water main that ruptured last week was slated to be replaced sometime in the fall anyway. Do you guys do prioritization based on some of what Mr. Chung was just describing? Mr. Bailey. Yes. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you, too. My name is Roger Bailey, and just to put some perspective in the discussion, I just want to share with you some of the investment that the city has made over the last 4 to 5 years in trying to replace and manage its assets. The public utilities, as you know, is very aggressive. We're highly regulated, but we do have a complex system. And because of that, we do need to make sure that we replace a lot of the stuff that we have. From fiscal year 2008 to the end of 12, on the water side, we invested $376 million in replacement of assets. On the wastewater side, we from 2008 to the end of 12, we invested over $235 million in the replacement of assets. So it is something that we currently do, and we will certainly continue to do that. During that period of time, in terms of water pipeline replacement, we replaced or at least awarded 140 miles of pipeline on the water side of the business. And on the wastewater side, we replace or rehab 172 miles of pipeline. So, we are doing a lot. It's very costly, and it's certainly something that we have to manage as we go forward because certainly every dollar that we spend, we collect it from the ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. And do you have a time frame for when all of the old cast iron pipes are slated to be replaced?
Yeah, that's a good question. We, so far, as you know, we are under a consent order by the health department to replace the cast iron pipe in our distribution system. We have approximately 90 miles to go, and we expect that by the end of fiscal year 17, we should be almost complete with that. We have replaced over 90 miles so far, and a lot of that money that I just talked about, at least 39% of that was in water main replacement.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Okay.
I know we're going to have a much deeper discussion next month on condition assessments citywide, and so I look forward to all of your participation in that conversation. I really do like the steering committee's approach to be one organization. All too often, we seem to hear folks say that we want to do. We went to such and such a department, and they sent us to see another department because of a certain silo mentality, which is not unexpected in a bureaucracy like the city. But I think it's frustrating from the public's point of view. We can't really expect the members of the public to know all the intricacies of our bureaucracy. So I really support the steering committee's efforts here to speak with one voice and want all of you to know that you have a friend in this committee. So thank you again. Just to wrap up this item, when talking about the IT solutions for asset management, I don't know if this is best addressed by the steering committee or by Mr. Bailey or somebody else, but I know that council approved some funds for the beginning of the development of the system that you described during the last budget year. Can you talk a little bit more about where that is right now?
That project was also an EAM effort that was being led by the Department of IT to look at some projects within the transportation and stormwater. We are working together with them so that effort is actually being wrapped into this public utilities-led effort. So all of their the funds, et cetera, will be brought in so that we can put in a solution that's a citywide solution, and that public utilities, having, of course, a large amount of the assets, as well as a pretty comprehensive way that we do asset management, maintenance, et cetera, we'll be able to build something that works for the whole city. So it's really, we're cooperating with that other effort.
Great. Okay. That's very good to hear. Last thing on this item, just curious, do our contracts for condition assessments, to the extent that we've done them, or other consulting or construction contracts, require that the bidders provide real-time GIS data so that we could build additional user-friendly features into the CIP website with minimal effort from staff? I'm thinking how we could add condition assessment data and maybe the year that certain infrastructure was upgraded without having to have city staff manually input information off of a paper report.
It's a very good question. I don't know that the previous condition assessment studies incorporated GIS or if they required GIS, but it's really a good idea to do that. I would think going forward we would certainly make that a requirement.
Great. Excellent. It's good to hear. Thank you. Would the steering committee be willing to return to this committee and periodically give us updates on what you guys are doing?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Glad to hear that. As we outlined in the work plan last month, I'd like to see the city adopt an asset management policy, and we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Sherman to have city staff work with the committee consultant as well as the IBA, returning to the committee within 60 days with a proposed council policy on asset management with Ms. Leitner's amendment that we include best practices from other cities that we could then forward to City Council in time from implementation in fiscal year 14.
I had two, and that included to come back with, I believe it was the business plan.
And the business plan as well. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Leitner. So we do have a motion and a second. Without further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. All opposed, none. So that vote passes unanimously. That motion passes unanimously with Council Member Emerald absent. Thank you all very much. Moving on. We are going to go now to item 3, which is a presentation from the Community Planners Committee regarding the community input process. One of the goals as you gentlemen are sitting down, or Mr. LaCava, as you are sitting down solo of this committee, as outlined in our work plan as adopted last month, is to engage the community and permanently establish a role for neighborhood input. We've started by establishing a standing item on our agenda for community input on infrastructure needs and priorities. The next step in getting us to an established community role is to discuss how the city undertook community engagement last year. For the first time, the city sought input directly from the 42 community planning groups on the fiscal year 14 CIP budget. Here to give us the highlights on how that process went, as well as any lessons learned, is Joe LaCava with our Community Planners Committee. Mr. LaCava, thanks for being here. How much time would you like this morning?
About 10 minutes.
Sounds great. Thank you. Please proceed.
Well, thank you to the chair, and thank you for the committee to talk about the good work of the Planners Committee as well as the planning groups. And as the chair has indicated, this was kind of a seminal effort at participatory budgeting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience we went through and then conclude with lessons learned, and hoping that this information will kind of become the starting template for creating an annual process. This process did start last year. There were a number of other organizations that were lobbying for participatory budgeting, but the Planners Committee heard it for the very first time in July, and frankly, it really kind of came out of left field. Despite the surprise, this was an incredible opportunity to kind of break the ground on community input before budget is started. We basically went through a very rapid program to step up and understand the framework for this, as well as offer training sessions and then actually have public hearings in the various communities. We took 18 weeks from the time the idea was first floated to the time that we were able to submit recommendations. So this process last year was more about a proof of concept rather than a full implementation of what the planning groups are capable of and what participatory budget is all about. Nevertheless, the community process was indeed a very impressive one in this first go-round. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but what we had to do at first was to develop a framework so that people understood what they had to do, what the task was, and how to dovetail their work with the community, with the city's efforts. But we wanted to both give them a framework to operate under, but also give them enough freedom to really talk about what their passion and interest was at the ground level. And a good example of that is framing where they should draw inspiration from for their projects, from the very mundane of simply taking the current CIP list and prioritizing that to coming up with brand new projects that no one's ever talked about at a city level. And so again, this, I'm not going to, you can read this at your convenience, but it does provide that framework. We developed this very fast on the fly, but I think it provides a good starting point for the conversations going forward. The key aspect to this effort was public outreach. To the degree that I had a bully pulpit as chair of CPC, that was what the item that I pushed over and over again. We had to demonstrate that as the through the planning group structure, that we were reaching throughout the community and getting people who don't normally come to planning group meetings, because as fun as they are, not everybody does show up once a month, that everybody would have a voice in this. And so the goal was maximize public participation, but minimize expectations. We wanted to be honest. There wasn't buckets of money, of city money, sitting around waiting to be spent. So we wanted to be honest with people that the recommendations that would come up in this first go-round probably wasn't going to result in any funded projects. But it would create, again, a template, both in how to do this process and to begin to focus the community and build consensus on what projects they would like to see happen and something they could use going forward. The outreach that we saw groups use was basically the regularly publicly noticed meetings. As you know, we have to conform with the Brown Act. But some groups actually stepped up and did extended outreach. They did online surveys. They took advantage of their community newspapers. They used a variety of social media as ways to reach out to every corner of their community. And what I'm especially proud of is some of the groups actually went even beyond that and started coordinating with other community-based organizations that they had not coordinated with in the past, school districts, recreation councils, neighborhood councils. So this was kind of a nice byproduct. They created relationships they didn't have in the past. And I think exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done to make this process successful. In addition, we also got some publicity from individual council offices, and that was certainly appreciated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the results. Again, keeping in mind that we have 42 planning groups across every corner of our city, 29 communities developed and identified 225 brand new projects, in addition to prioritizing current CIP projects. Now, I was particularly concerned about how that represented across our city. And so I broke that down. 16 communities south of Interstate 8 identified 176 projects, and 13 communities north of 8 identified 49 new projects. And that breakdown shouldn't surprise, as our communities south of 8 are generally our older communities that both have deficiencies in their infrastructure as well as aging infrastructure. There's some nuances in those numbers that I can talk about if you're curious. 11 communities made no recommendations this first time around, but look forward to participating in the next go-round. And again, that broke out 3 communities south of 8, 8 communities north of Interstate 8. Frankly, some communities found this process moving too fast, the learning curve too steep, and said, we can't absorb this. We'll come back next year and try to get, excuse me. For some of the communities north of 8, again, those are newer communities, and they currently are still actually in progress. They're still getting developer funds. They have robust facility benefit programs. And so they don't see a need to identify new projects because they're being taken care of. And certainly that's where our newer infrastructure is in the north part of our city. So they're not, that will come to them someday, but for now they're okay. 2 groups did not respond at all. I'm certainly not trying to embarrass anyone, but I made it a point to make sure I contacted every single community, chased everyone down to make sure they had an opportunity to participate in this process. And again, because this came up so suddenly and had such a short time frame, I think that was part of the reason, and we'll see more robust participation going forward. So now to the lessons learned. One, I think the big takeaway for me, and probably no surprise, the planning groups can provide a structured and documented process for direct local public outreach participation with CPC as the overarching manager. It is the only organized structure that covers every corner of our city. It is the only organized structure in which the committee members are elected locally in a democratic fashion. Next, the planning group should start their hearings no later than July. You may remember from last year's timeline, a lot of them didn't start until September or October. That's much too late in the process. The mayor's office needs to hear this information by November, and we need to start earlier so that there's adequate public outreach, conversations, building consensus on their recommendations. Also, we should kick off the public process with a citywide publicity campaign through the mayor's office and the city council. We didn't do that last year, and that's probably a good thing because it was such a first-time effort. But we really need access to citywide media. We really need to alert people this is an important part of the process and how they can communicate their needs through the planning groups to City Hall. We also need to offer training in locations throughout the city for both planning group members and the public. We did scramble and put together 3 training sessions, but they were all held in Kearny Mesa, which is not the easiest place for a lot of folks to get to. And what I saw last year is that 1 or 2 members of a community group would show up, and they had the burden of then taking the message back to their community, their planning group, which is a little bit of a tough burden for a volunteer. But really, they were learning so much on their own that it was difficult for them to communicate to their own planning groups. By holding locations, I hope to get more people as well as members of the public through this process. And the more people in the community that are informed, the better off it's going to be. And dovetailing with that is that we should have city staff attend at least 1 planning group meeting in each community. Given the shortened time frame last year and with 42 planning groups, of course that wasn't possible. And when I say city staff, that can be public works, that can be city council reps, but we need someone who is independent and informed that can go to the planning groups and answer the questions in an objective way. And for this next year, I'll even offer my services to make sure we get at least 1 attendance at every planning group. We also need to assist planning groups in expanding their public outreach and participation. Some groups don't have any budget, they don't have a website, they don't have a neighborhood newspaper to take advantage of, so they need extra help to help spread the word throughout their neighborhoods and communities. Dovetailing some of the conversations you had today and last month, we need to continue to improve the city's CIP website. We need to provide city data in user-friendly formats. Staff did a fantastic job of doing that last year. It was all manually generated, which was good, but there's better ways to do that. And to simplify that and have it accessible to anybody who has access to the internet would be a big plus. I think it also dovetails with a lot of the other things this committee is talking about. We should also consider online forums to facilitate submittal of community recommendations. Last year, we gave them electronic spreadsheets and asked them to provide the recommendations that way. But I also made a promise to them is that whatever format you give me, I will make sure it gets in the city's hands. So I got a pencil on paper. I got forms that were manually typed. And we packaged it up and we took it to city staff, and city staff again stepped up and made sure they took that on. But it would be easier if we had online forms, because it would also be easier for city staff to accept and then fold that information into their databases if it's already been pre-formatted. And then last, we should also create a process to track community recommendations through the budget development process. People understand that not every recommendation they make is going to get funded, but they need to know that their recommendations are being taken seriously and thoughtfully considered. They want to know why, if a project didn't get funded, why it didn't get funded. Was that just not high enough on a priority list? Did they not frame the project correctly? And having that tracking process will help them understand and then do a better job the next year. I did this last month, but I want to do it again. You know, last year was an extraordinary effort in this, and it was only made possible by city staff who really went out of their way and had the passion to make the process work. And I want to offer a special thanks to James Nagelort, Mark Nasser, Aaron Noel, and Angela Colton, who really stepped up, were completely available, that organized the 3 training sessions for us. And I know there was a lot of other city staff in other departments that had made it possible. And that's what really makes this work, getting the community engaged, having the staff support. And with that, I'll conclude. Participatory budgeting works. We should implement this on a regular basis. And the planning groups and the CPC stand ready to build on last year's success and make this an annual process. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Joe. We really appreciate your report here, and thank you for all your hard work over the last year in putting this together, and for your future work as well. We do have 4 members of the public who would wish to speak on this item. First up is Ramses Servin, followed by Jeffrey Johnson, followed by Corinne Wilson. Mr. Servin, good morning. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, committee. Chairman Kersey and Councilwoman Leitner. I'm sure you two have met you before at our Rancho Penasquitos Planning Board meetings and council meeting or town council meetings. Thank you for your attendance at those. And good morning to the public as well. My name is Ramses Serban, and I'm a member of the Rancho Penasquitos Town Council and the Planning Board. And I wanted to speak in favor of the general proposition of the participatory budget process and having the community planning groups involved in that process. As Joe was saying, last year the CPGs had a very short timeline in which we had to work with, and the PQ Planning Board, we started our work with 6 weeks to submit a list to the city, and I just wanted to let you guys know kind of how we did things. So, we formed a CIP subcommittee with about 6 members, and with that, our committee was able to create from scratch an online web-based form from which members of the public could just log on and submit their ideas and let us know the CIP projects that they thought would be the type of things that the city would want to hear about. And in addition to the online survey, we had the social media outreach, and we also had involvement from members of other councils within Penasquitos, like the Recreation Council, the Town Council, and the Fire Safe Council. And after 6 weeks, we were able to get almost 200 unique responses to our survey, and from those responses, our subcommittee again met, identified those projects that were valid CIP projects, and then prioritized them, and we were able to come up with 6 projects that were valid CIP projects. However, the rest of the other responses were really other great input from the public. So I just want to let you know, in 6 weeks we were able to do that with no budget really. So I think if there was a little bit more time and maybe a little bit more support from the city, I'm not saying that we need money, but like Joe was saying, additional publicity from the city would be great. So just overall, again, I think the participatory budget process works. The CPGs are a great place to run that through. And if we can do what we did in 6 weeks with no money, I think we could do a lot better with a little bit more time and a little bit more support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Serban. Jeffrey Johnson, followed by Corinne Wilson.
I'm going to use my laptop here as a poor man's teleprompter, but I'll go quickly. So, hi, I'm Jeff Johnson, the Code for America Brigade Captain here in San Diego, and I just wanted to give a quick comment in support of this agenda item and give a quick brief on an event we held this past weekend, which was part of a national and international weekend of civic innovation organized around the principles of open government, open data, and open source. There's parallel events held in 22 cities around the country and in 150 cities worldwide, and I really want to thank Councilman Kersey for sending Lee Friedman from his staff, and as well as Stephen Hadley from Donna Fry's office in the Mayor's Office of Open Government and Civic Engagement. And I also want to give a special thanks to Joe LaCava for joining us and bringing the use cases and priorities of the community planning groups and, above all, your wisdom and leadership skills, which are greatly valued. So it was awesome to have all of you there, and I believe we got a fantastic start toward our shared goals of bringing cutting-edge civic engagement technology to the city and our region. And so for just some quick background, Code for America is a nonprofit that collaborates with local government to facilitate and foster innovation in their cities. It's probably best known for the fellowship program, which is kind of like Peace Corps for geeks. And through a new accelerator program and peer network and brigade programs, Code for America is connecting cities with tech startups and civic-minded volunteers as well as with each other. So our local group here in San Diego is called Open San Diego, and we're one of the Code for America brigades. And it primarily functions as a space where civic technology people and local government types who are interested in these kind of issues can get together and discuss them and build consensus and move forward together. And so at our event, we had some very focused discussions on this really forward-thinking participatory budgeting program, and that this committee is taking responsibility for and is discussing today. And we talked about spending transparency and crowdsourcing community input and even this kind of radical idea of crowdfunding some of these projects. And this was supposed to be a hackathon or code sprint, but Joe very wisely advised us that we should think about where we want to go and the best way to get there before we just get in the car and hit the gas. So I want to be clear that what I'm trying to do here today is to first build some credibility and then enlist you guys as champions, and then look for some problems and finally propose solutions. And in my own experience, technologists like myself are quick to jump to the latter two steps, and I'm really here to focus on the first two. And I think some of the problems with the CIP process and this participatory budgeting process are well known and fairly well understood. And I'm certainly ready to look at some of the potential solutions. But I think it's critical that we don't get the cart before the horse here. So I'm here today to make myself and our organization available as a resource for this committee to turn to for help with this project. And my goal is to help you feel empowered to reach out to the local tech community and startups, some of which are here today, and to help build on this awesome previous work and really accelerate and expand on this program and help citizens feel empowered to participate in a meaningful, structured way and practical way and feel that they have full insight into how the program is being run and how their tax dollars are being spent. And so thanks for your time. I left some materials about Code for America, and I hope you'll take time to review them and look forward to figuring out how to best work with this committee and the city departments to make this program a world-class example of participatory budgeting and build on your previous work and looking at expanding what other cities, Code for America cities have done in this space, and leave a legacy and some enhanced tools that other cities can build on themselves. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. As a tech guy myself, I really appreciate what you guys are doing and look forward to talking to you more about this. And this committee in the near future will take up the topic of the city's CIP website and how we can better engage the public utilizing technology. So thank you. Ms. Wilson, good morning.
Good morning.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Kersey and committee members. Corrine Wilson with the Center on Policy Initiatives, and I'm here representing the Community Budget Alliance this morning. Just want to thank Mr. LaCava for his commitment and his efforts on this. He worked really hard last year, and it shows he really cares about this, and he gives freely of his time. So we look forward to working with him on this. So this is a large and important undertaking. And, we don't need to do this. We don't need to start from scratch. There are other cities that have processes and structures that will really make this work. And we are looking at those, and we will come forward with some recommendations, some suggestions, and I will reach out to Mr. LaCava with those as well. One of the principles of the Community Budget Alliance is increased community input in the budgetary and infrastructure decision-making processes here at the city. And so we are in support of this concept. However, there are some issues that still need to be addressed, and I did hear some of those brought up with Mr. LaCava's presentation. So we've collected feedback from residents, those folks that are actually at the table at the Community Budget Alliance, and some of them are actually on their community planning group. So there does need to be greater participation by community members, but especially from low-income and minority residents. To be successful, the barriers of participation need to be overcome. Things like outreach needing to be thorough. Some communities are just posting the information about the meeting, say, at the local library and only in English. So that's, for people that aren't familiar with community planning groups, that's not actually enough. And we really need that education about the importance of participation. Also, CPG membership can sometimes not representative of the community. It can skew towards white, older males, homeowners, business owners. And so to really be inclusive, we need to do outreach to renters, to younger community members, to immigrants and low-income and minority residents. And also, some of the feedback has been that the loudest voices have a tendency to get greater influence, and it doesn't necessarily come out of whether they're speaking for many folks and they're representative or they're only speaking for themselves. And then 3 great difficulties in participating in meetings is lack of translation. So if you come and you're not a non-native English speaker, it's difficult to follow along or participate. Use of jargon, which I like to call land use ease. Need to have a deep background on the subject or the project in order to participate. You can't just kind of come when, childcare allows you to come. And further, city staff aren't always present, so you don't actually have someone you can ask those questions of, which Mr. LaCava did point out as well. And other cities have requirements for outreach efforts, representative translation, et cetera. Oh, that was my 3 minutes? Darn it. All right, so I have more. But we really applaud these efforts. We look forward to working with the Infrastructure Committee and Mr. LaCava to really make this representative and equitable and transparent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I can't imagine what's confusing about terms like EAM, SAP, and CIP and all these acronyms. So your points are well taken. Thank you. Last up, we have David Modi.
Thank you. I'm David Modi, chairman of the Kensington Talmadge Planning Group, one of the older neighborhoods in the city. First off, I want to thank Councilmember Leitner for remembering the need for infrastructure that's completely absent. One observation I have to make about the process that we engaged in was that there really was an observational bias in the needs identified by the planning groups. We evaluated what we could observe. That's a strength and a weakness. We can observe the condition of we can't observe the condition of a water pipe, but we can observe the condition of a road. So that's sort of where our projects tended to go. So I'm glad that James Nagelvort is here, because if we're asked to participate again, I think it would be helpful if he offered us greater guidance on how we deal with those assets we can't observe. And trees are an asset. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate those comments as well. That concludes our public comment on this item. We will now go to committee member questions. I'll just start off real quickly with a comment. I just want to say that I like the process that was started last year, and I certainly want to continue with it, get it going not only for the fiscal year 15 budget, but also for our 5-year infrastructure plan as soon as July, and also help to publicize it as well. So thank you again, Mr. LaCava. Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Joe again for the work that you put in on this. There was a lot of good informational items you brought forth. I love the fact that you wanted people to diminish their expectations as well. It was very good. Sometimes a wish list can get a little far-fetched at times.
Absolutely.
But very, very nice.
Absolutely.
And the need for more community involvement. I mean, the one thing I've noticed, while campaigning and going to all these different community groups is that most of those people have been there for a long time, moved through the chairs 3 or 4 different times, and it's the same group of people, and it would be good to get some new blood into those groups. And then lastly, I just want to know if the chair was really looking for a motion at this time. Would love to make a motion to try and get this back before us.
Absolutely. So I would definitely entertain a motion. And would you like to set a time frame, or?
Yeah, I'm making a motion right now that we request the staff and committee work together with the consultants and the IBA, the CPC, to bring back to this committee something that we can adopt for a city council policy within 60 days or so.
So council policy on community input.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Within 60 days?
Is that doable?
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
We have a motion on the floor. Okay, anything else, Mr. Sherman? Okay. Ms. Leitner.
Just want to say thank you, Joe. I know you don't do anything by halvesies, and I know that this was a phenomenal effort. You're very understated in what you said you did, and I recollect some of the things during the entire process and the frustration with the insufficient time to really mount a good campaign. And I appreciate your critical evaluation of where we need to make improvements going forward, and certainly to start it earlier and to have the anticipation that this is coming forward is terrific. I hope you will continue to stay involved with this, and that you haven't made other arrangements for your next year here. And do support bringing this back to committee with the idea on how are we going to do the outreach to the community. Sometime, I think 60 days is going to be the very longest time frame we can have for this discussion in order to get out to the community, because I note that during the summer is not necessarily a good time either. You did mention July, right, but it does work a little better if you get there before folks are having sort of summer schedules to work with.
I'd be willing to say 30.
Well, if sooner, that would be great. The other thing is, with the program we had a number of years back that the City Council actually participated in, taking San Diego Speaks to the communities. At the time, it was only the members of the Budget Committee, and only their communities were included. But we did have quite a bit of community participation with that effort as well. And so maybe there's a way to meld the two types of programs. where there would actually be not just community planning group sponsored, but also city or council sponsored events to get additional input.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Chair, may I make a couple of responses, quick responses? Certainly when we set this program up last year, one of the things we made clear is that the intent was not to make the planning groups or the CPC as the gatekeeper. Certainly the public has an opportunity to reach out in whatever way they have through their council members or the mayor's office, et cetera. So that avenue, I think, would still be preserved through this process. We're just trying to create a formalized process. In terms of timing, I know Almas and I talked about, it's kind of difficult because up until June you're still talking about 14, so it's hard to get people excited about 15. And so we thought July, and if people understand that's the time frame going forward, then they can budget, because a lot of groups are dark in August. And I also kind of speak a little bit, and these are my personal opinions, not the ratified opinions of the planning groups. I think the comments about the planning groups are well taken. For those of you who don't know, in 2007 we redid the bylaws of all the planning groups, and one of the things that were changed was term limits on that. So over the next couple of years you're going to start to see more turnover in planning groups. And whenever somebody approaches me about the makeup of a planning group, is that they're democratically elected, and if you don't like the group, then get organized and vote new people in. It's a lot easier than people would like. It is difficult. I think the issues that Corinne raised are very valid issues. It's a difficult issue. Translation is expensive. And the other point is that for a lot of planning groups, they don't really do much month to month. And when you don't do much, people don't show up and they kind of forget about you, because some of our planning groups are not very active. And I definitely saw a correlation between the input we were getting and how active that planning group is normally during the course of the year. And so I have this odd philosophy of making the planning groups more responsible, have more accountability, and then that sends a better message to the people that are on the group and the community that this is the place to go and get active. And it isn't fun to go to yet another meeting, but it is a good way, a good forum to do that. So we'll start to see improvement, and we look forward to it's a hard job, but we look forward to doing it. So thank you.
Great. Thanks again, Joe. I think getting this community input process formalized and going as soon as possible is absolutely critical to the mission of this committee of rebuilding our city. Our work plan adopted last month also calls for this committee to explore additional technologies, such as ones we've heard about this morning, that allow direct engagement with the community. Because I happen to believe that if you have a well-structured process and some innovative technologies, you could really bolster civic involvement, which is obviously something that we're all looking for. It's a good thing for the city. It helps us all take pride in what we accomplish. And we're going to be discussing options for additional input, greater transparency at future meetings of this committee. Ultimately, we need a community input process like the one that Joe just walked us through to get us to a 5-year comprehensive infrastructure plan, which is, of course, our goal for this year. So we do have a motion on the floor by Mr. Sherman. Ms. Leitner, did you second that? Okay, I will second that. Without any further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. And we have no opposition with unanimous passage with Council Member Emerald absent. Thanks again, Mr. Okaba. Appreciate it. Moving on now to item 4, which has a companion item 5, report from the Public Works Department regarding the Deferred Capital Program update, as well as the reallocation of funds. Just to give people a bit of background, back in 2008, the city approved the issuance of our first deferred capital bond of approximately $102 million. And last year, the city approved the second issuance of about $75 million. The second bond is part of a series of bonds that the City Council has included in our adopted financing plan to help catch up on the deferred capital needs of the city. I see Mr. Heinrichs again, as well as Mr. Nagelbort. Good to see you both. Gentlemen, I see that the items 4 and 5 are somewhat related. Would you like to present on both items together, or would you prefer that we consider them separately?
I think we would rather have them both go together.
Okay. Perfect. And how much time would you like?
I think 20 minutes for both items.
20 minutes. Sounds good. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you. Again, I'm Tony Heinrichs, the Public Works Director. And with me today, assisting with the presentation, are James Nagelvort the Assistant Director of the Public Works Department and the City Engineer, Darren Greenhall to my right, the Deputy Director in the Engineering Capital Projects Division of the Public Works Department, and we also have Hassan Youssef and other members of the Transportation and Stormwater Department here as well to assist with the presentation. First of all, we'd just like to give you an update on the assessments that have been completed to date on the city's general fund infrastructure, namely the streets, buildings, and storm drain assets of the city. This is just a summary of the past condition assessments that have been conducted by the city. First of all, with streets, partial surveys were done in 2001, 2003, and 2007. Those were primarily assessment of the city's asphalt streets. 2009, there was an assessment made of all the city's concrete streets. And again, in those years, it was just partial assessments of partial inventory. And in 2011, all the streets were assessed throughout the city. So we now have 100% information on the condition of the streets throughout the city. For buildings and other related facilities, in 2007, there was an assessment of 31 public safety buildings, fire stations and police stations. 2008, the city conducted an assessment of the 5 buildings here at the Civic Center. And then the following year, in 2009, there was an assessment done of 443 buildings throughout the city, again, funded by the city's general fund. And with storm drains, 2008 and 2009, there was an assessment made of the corrugated metal pipe storm drain network in easements throughout the city. From 2009 through 11, a CMP drain assessment was conducted within the city's right-of-way. And in 2010, 2011, an assessment was conducted of the city's storm drain pump stations. Now, with all that information cobbled together, last year, when we presented to the infrastructure, or not the infrastructure committee at the time, it was Budget and Finance Committee, and then the full council, we estimated the deferred capital backlog for each of these asset classes to be as follows. For streets, it was about $478 million, facilities, $185 million, storm drains, $235 million, for a total of $898 million. That was our best assessment at the time of what the backlog of deferred maintenance or deferred capital was for these 3 asset classes throughout the city. Again, that's a static number. It changes constantly, and that backlog information is updated whenever you do the condition assessment. So that's why it's important to try to do these on a regular schedule, to keep that information current. Last year, we had a very lengthy discussion with the City Council on asset service levels and various funding options to meet service levels. At the March 20th City Council meeting, the Council adopted a status quo service level. Actually, I misspoke. The status quo service level was presented, but what was adopted by the Council was a funding level known as Enhanced Funding Option B, and I'll explain that in more detail here in just a minute. But by service level, what we meant was that we wanted to keep the condition of the assets at their current conditions. In other words, nothing would get better over time, nothing would get worse. So that's what we were striving for. And we fell just a little bit short of meeting that goal with the funding that was available and what was affordable. And in the next slide, we also described what we meant in terms of the service levels for the status quo option for the various categories. For streets, we recommended doing these assessments every 4 years. And the next one, by the way, is scheduled for fiscal year 2015. Status quo meant that we wanted to keep our streets in those relative proportions: good, 42%, fair, 36%, poor, 22%. And then we had the fiscal year 2013 cost to maintain the status quo option. So All the other information follows a similar logic. When we get to storm drains, the reinforced concrete pipe network is something that is always being assessed. It's very expensive to actually survey using TV cameras to get into all the concrete storm drains throughout the city. But that effort is an ongoing effort. For buildings or facilities, as I mentioned the last time we did a comprehensive survey, and that didn't address all the city's buildings, but we did that back in 2009. And again, we recommend every 3 or 4 years doing similar assessments, and we have one scheduled for fiscal year 2014. In fact, we've included money in our budget request to do that assessment. This is really an eye chart, but last year we presented this information to the council, and it was an attempt to try to explain the current funding levels that we had in the 5-year forecast at that time, what was meant by the status quo option. Again, the thinking there was assets wouldn't get better, they wouldn't get worse over a 5-year period, and what type of funding stream would it take to achieve that purpose. As I mentioned, we didn't get to the status quo option. The council adopted the bottom option there in the table, known as enhanced funding option B. It's essentially the same as the one right above it, except that with the enhanced funding option, we're relying more on cash as opposed to bond proceeds over the 5-year period. And I should note that it's only in the 5th year of that 5-year forecast where we actually approximate the amount of money that we would need in that current year to keep the assets in the status quo condition. So for the first 4 years, you're still deteriorating. And at the time, we recommended or suggested that that deterioration rate could be about 5 to 10% per year. That's the best approximation we could give at the time. So that's what we're currently looking at in the 5-year forecast, and hopefully we'll be able to improve upon that. So again, in fiscal year 2014, next fiscal year, we're going to do a citywide assessment of all the general fund assets. Excuse me. And this time, the Public Utilities Department is going to be participating in that assessment as well. So they'll be using their resources to do an assessment of some of their critical facilities, and that will be included in the scope of service for that particular effort. And then the following year, 2015, Transportation and Stormwater Department will be, again, assessing the condition of the city streets network. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to James to go through the next series of slides.
Thank you, Tony, and good morning, everybody. My chore, or pleasure, is to present for you the deferred capital bonding history and project execution history. Next slide. So back in 2009, which was mentioned, we went forward our first bond. We referred to it as deferred capital bond number 1. It was approximately $102.7 million. We did generate some interest off that bond, $600,000, brought it to a total of $103.3 million. It was distributed over a group of projects or asset types, as you see there, listed below. In your packet, in the report, you'll see that we've given you the project data, so you have a much deeper information. But at a high level, you see how we allocated the funds. Originally, the project list consisted of 106 projects. That's what was originally back in 2009. Two things changed. One is the market changed. Market crashed. The economy got poor, but bidding got good for us. So prices were really low, and so what has hurt some people actually helps us out. So we actually ended up having project savings, and so we've gone from 106 projects now to 146 projects. The second thing that changed is that when this bond went forward, we were really looking at this bond as a one-time bond in the very, very beginning. We weren't looking at this as a program. As Tony mentioned, the presentations given to City Council and the Budget and Finance Committee last year followed afterwards. And so when this bond first went forward in that, we looked at it as a one-time bond, and what's important about that is that if there isn't future revenue coming forward, we have to fund projects, their design, their planning, their bid and award, land acquisition, their environmental permitting, and their construction in their entirety. So you're front-loading projects and holding on to that cash because you don't anticipate any new funding coming forward. Now we're talking about deferred capital bond number 1, deferred capital bond number 2, 3. We're talking about a program. And actually what that does is it changes the way we finance projects. We want to be able to load them with the revenue that they need as they're going to expend funds in that. So you'll see that that's what has changed in our program or effort. So we have 146 projects. Right now the status is we got 57 projects constructed, built, 24 in construction right now, 11 awarding, 32 in design and 22 in planning. Now, some of the ones that are in design and planning, it isn't just lack of execution on our part. They're actually waiting for the next bonds to be able to get funded now to be able to go into construction and move forward in that. Expended to date, expended or encumbered to date, $97.3 million. And for those of you who don't know, when we say encumbered, what that means is we've entered into contracts. So we've got contractual commitments. We haven't expended those funds yet, but we certainly are obligated to. Oh, you skipped one, Darren. That's okay. I want to get done. Trust me on the other slide. Okay. Bond number 2, a little bit of background. So now we start talking about a program, the 5-year outlook, the 5-year financial outlook, as Tony mentioned, got adjusted. It got adjusted to reflect option funding B, or enhance option B. And in there, it identified funding to be able to move forward of the $75 million. And this is something debt management's moved forward. In 2012, just a few months ago, City Council gave debt management the approval to move forward with that financing. They still have a couple of series of steps they need to go forward in that. We anticipate getting that funding into the actual projects by the first quarter of, we got that funding into projects by the first quarter of fiscal year 2013, so around September. What you see is the allocation of how those funds got distributed. In this bond allocation, we added $10 million for ADA projects. This would be any types of projects that deal with our responsibilities for addressing the Americans with Disabilities Act. Funding got also distributed to streets, facilities, and storm drains. It is important to point out in streets, that isn't all entirely overlay. That also includes street lights and some other assets associated with streets and that. Project status so far, assuming there isn't any project savings yet, we're at 92 projects for the bond number 2. Two have been constructed, 2 are under construction, 5 are awarding, 20 in design, and 63 are in planning. We have entered into contracts, pre-encumbered, encumbered, or expended over $19 million. It's actually over 20 right now. And pre-encumbered means that we've opened bids and we're in the process of signing contracts. We just haven't signed them yet. Some of you may recall, this isn't a deferred capital bond, but you may recall that City Council last fall approved the city going forward for $25 million. This is tied to the funds that we had received from SDG&E on a settlement related to the fires that had occurred. And when those funds came in play, the decision was made by the past mayor's administration and by the City Council to then allow for additional bonding for the projects you see listed there up to $25 million. There's a series of steps that debt management still needs to go through to actually continue to get council approval before they go to the marketplace for that. When they come back, they're actually going to be increasing this and asking council's approval to make it for $30 million. The purpose of that is to fund an additional $5 million for permanent BMPs for the stormwater program. This is to be in compliance with our stormwater permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The reason that we've added this bond on here was not all of it goes to deferred capital. A lot of it is going to new facilities, but a portion of it can be argued that it's actually benefiting and helping bring down the backlog of $898 million. Clearly, the $9.9 million that goes to roads, that is deferred capital. Also, in each of these facilities, Skyline, Mission Hills, San Ysidro, the Mission Valley Fire Station 45, all of those actually had deferred capital needs. They were in the range of a few $100,000, not in multiple millions of dollars. But when these facilities get replaced, you are going to address some of that backlog on that. Funding, by the way, we anticipate funding for these projects to finally be in the projects available by the end of this fiscal year. Right after we get these items forward to council and approved in that, then staff is going to begin their effort on bond number 3. This is bond number 3 identified again in the 5-year financial outlook. This is working towards option B, as Tony mentioned. And what we'll be doing is interfacing both with all the client departments and then also each of the 9 council offices, putting together the first step is the project list. These would be storm drain projects, facilities, and of course streets. The 3 primary categories in that. And we would anticipate coming back to this committee, I'm assuming that this is the correct committee, that we'd be coming back and then bringing forward this project list and then also eventually walking hand in hand with debt management as they bring forward their items to be able to go forward with the next bond in that. And having said that, I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Darren Greenhall to take us home.
So as James mentioned earlier, the first bond issuance was really all unto itself. So we had to go through design, the permitting, the CEQA process, all of that, and then cycle down as we wound down. As projects freed money up, we moved to more projects. We came back to council, added the list, all of that process, trying to get to the point where we've expended those funds. With option B, we have a process whereby we are actually going to be funding on multiple projects, multiple funding issuances, and kind of as you need the money, it's showing up. In order to do that, we've got several things that we have to consider. First of all, the majority of the money in each bond issuance is construction. Design and permitting is something less than 30% of the overall expenditures. And that design and permitting process can take a long time depending on the project. The projects that have very little, they're exempt. They're going to city forces. They're small projects. Those can actually get to construction in 3 to 6 months and take less than a year to implement. As you get more and more detailed plans required, historical elements, most of the Balboa Park has historical elements, those kinds of things, your timeline starts extending to getting the design, the permitting, the CEQA process completed. Advertising and awarding of a construction contract can take 3 to 5 months. It actually takes us 2 to 5 months to get the money into the projects once you've approved the bond issuance. And so there's time and effort necessary to go through all of those things. And each bond issuance then will have a sequence to try and line all that up. So as we begin to look at how we're going to implement that, each bond issuance will have to be talking about not only projects that would be funded in bond number 3, but you're looking at projects that will be bond number 3, 4, and maybe some even in 5 for longer design and CEQA processes. So the list will be longer, and there'll be more attention focused on that. We will be having to balance those projects as we roll over. The sooner we start on a project, the better. So as we're looking at that long list of projects coming in the future, we're going to be rolling any excess money from projects that complete into new projects that are coming in future designs or future bonds. The coordinated effort for project cost estimating and schedule development, timing those coordination for the 92 projects that are in there. They all have different schedules. They all have different cost estimates, and they all adjust on a monthly basis. And so we're tracking all of that, developing a master cash flow for the whole program and a master encumbrance schedule, because you have to have the money in place when you're awarding that construction contract. And so the combination of the expenditure rate, the future cash flow, and that encumbrance schedule will then dictate when we can issue those subsequent bonds. And then finally, I wanted to finish with every project that we work on, if we begin design, it has to end. All bond funds have to end in the expenses with a capitalizable asset. And so we can't start a design, or if we start a design and we never get to construction with a capitalizable asset, then the general fund will have to reimburse the bonds for that, and that money will have to be moved into something that can actually be capitalizable. So with that ends the presentation on the deferred capital update. As with relationship to the 1472, the money that we're moving around, there are 2 components in it. First, we're moving $2,190 into the Mission Bay Interceptor project. That is bond number 1. So there's an adjustment in both the value that was dictated to council before, and then there's also a need to actually physically move that money from the annual allocation into that specific bond. There's a number of projects that are related to the facilities group. When we advertised and began construction on the cab fire sprinkler project, it was anticipated that it was going to be an 18 to 20 month schedule. Soltech actually came in with 2 crews. They're doing 2 floors at a time, which significantly reduced the overtime and costs associated with staff monitoring and managing that contract. In addition, Soltech's bid came in under. We are able to free up $750,000 now, and we are distributing it to a number of projects that will keep them going. The $600,000 that's going back into the annual allocation will actually fund the construction of the Muni Gym roof. We have bids on that. We're just waiting for this council action to go forward so we can award that and get that done. There was an allotment originally in the original list. There was $1,086,000 for the police range for refurbishment out in Home and Federal. That went into the annual allocation. It was misallocated. It should have went into the standalone project. We want to move that. There's a number of storm drains that are in the same situation. The money's in the annual allocation. It needs to be in those standalone existing projects, so we're moving those things. And that's really what this 1472 is about. It's just putting the money back where it needs to be and freeing up the money that was in this cab fire sprinkler job. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was very informative. We appreciate it. As always, I'll kick us off with a few questions here. In the report on the deferred capital status, you refer to the $898 million, which has been widely circulated. I often get asked why we don't just borrow $898 million, just get it over with. Can you explain what would happen if $898 million landed on our laps tomorrow, besides the fact that we couldn't effectively spend it?
Well, actually, it would be great if we could have that kind of resources at one time, but you do raise some very good points. We have to be able to build up our capacity to be able to fully expend it in a timely manner. We have adequate capacity to tackle this over a 5-year period, and that's why the recommendation was made the way it was in the 5-year forecast. Also, if we were to receive those type of proceeds all at once, and Lakshmi Kami, our Director of Debt Management, is here, I think we would be facing, or could be facing, negative arbitrage if we were to bond for all those proceeds and you had the cash on hand, but you weren't spending it. So you get, I'm way out of my league here, but maybe Lakshmi could comment on that.
Good morning, Lakshmi Kami with Debt Management. Absolutely, on the expenditure side, clearly having the need for capital proceeds to spend down in a timely manner, in this case, taking that example of $900 million, having the reasonable expectation to spread it out over a 5-year period suggests that there is no need for all $900 million today. And on the financial side, clearly there is a cost to borrowing. We are borrowing at however low the rates are, there is a cost associated with the borrowing. You know, for example, 4% 30-year bonds, tax-exempt basis, still that is 4% that the city general fund is incurring on the interest costs. Tony mentioned about the negative arbitrage. I suppose that's a tail that wags dog, but ultimately the borrowing cost is really the important aspect that one should look at. Do we need the funds today, because there is a cost associated with that. With that said, the borrowed capital, if it is not spent down immediately, up to a certain point, local governments can invest those proceeds and earn interest earnings, what is called as arbitrage. Interest earnings, the fact that as with all macroeconomic factors, interest rates are low. At the same time, interest earnings are also therefore low. What we invest also is only getting us lower rates, and therefore there is that negative cost associated, not to mention the original borrowing is also costing the general fund. Therefore, just in time, borrowing seems to be, a good principle, fiscal principle to, as with any other on the borrowing side as well.
Great.
Another comment I'd like to offer, Chair Kersey, is that with that backlog, whatever the amount is, you never fully satisfy completing your backlog of deferred maintenance. Any organization has a backlog of deferred maintenance. It's recurring. It goes on in perpetuity. But what I think is a very important concept to try to understand and take measures to adopt is you have to establish service levels for the assets. So the real question is, what service level do you want for your streets, buildings, storm drains, water pipes, sewer lines, and that discussion really drives your funding profile and your ability to whittle away at your deferred maintenance backlog.
Well, thank you for that. And to that point, before I get to my colleagues, so just taking the streets example, because we have a good condition assessment on that. So we've got a $478 million backlog. Would you characterize that as the amount of money that we effectively should have been spending on maintenance over the last however many years, but didn't? Or is it the amount of money that we need to bring the streets up to a certain OCI level as identified by the consultant? Or how would you characterize that backlog?
I'd like to ask Hassan to address that.
Morning, Hassan.
Good morning. Hassan Yusuf, Deputy Director of Transportation and Stormwater Department. That amount of money, the $478 million, is what we need today actually to entirely eliminate the backlog and bring the streets to a good service level.
To bring all of the streets up to good?
100% of streets to good service level, correct.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's very good to know. Thank you.
Sure.
We'll go to my colleagues' questions and comments. Ms. Leitner.
In the facilities assessments on the public safety side, did you do an assessment on lifeguard stations? Was that included in the original?
I don't know. I don't have that information here with me. I'd have to get back. I know of definitely police stations and fire stations were looking at.
I note that you did mention that, and then they would be included in this upcoming one.
Yes, they will.
Okay. And then how much have we brought down our deferred capital amount with what we've been doing?
I don't have that information here with me either. I know last year, before the $898 million number was published, it was $840 million, but we didn't have the streets assessment conducted yet, and we had paid down some of the deferred maintenance backlog for buildings. So that was all reflected in that revised $898 million number, but we could get you that information.
Especially with the number of streets that have been done very recently, it would be great to take some of those numbers, take credit for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Leitner. Mr. Sherman.
Yeah, just a couple. I know you have the assessment coming up for the next fiscal year. How many facilities are you expecting to do the assessment on in that time period?
We're trying to do up to 1,500 citywide. That includes the ones that were looked at back in 2009, plus all the others that were skipped at that time.
Okay.
And in addition to that, we're going to be looking at the public utilities buildings also.
Okay, and then those are enterprise fund facilities,
Yes.
those type of things?
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to the enterprise fund ones, do we bill back the cost of those enterprise funds for the condition of the assessment?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And then another street assessment in fiscal year 15?
Yes.
Is there bridges included in that? Do you guys include bridges? Do we have city bridges?
We do have city bridges. Actually, Caltrans does the inspection. Okay. And next month, I think, will be 60 days from your last meeting, which you've asked for information on various assets, and bridges should be part of that. But it's not something we need to assess. It's actually Caltrans does all of the assessments for all of the bridges, and they provide us reports and data on that.
Okay, thank you. Then I noticed, too, it says you do portions of the city storm drain network is assessed on an annual basis.
Yes.
Is there a reason that it's only portions, or do you are you on a rotating schedule? You catch up. If you do, how many years does it take to catch up? Those type of things.
Yeah, Gene Matter from the Stormwater Division will address that.
Hello, Gene Matter from the Stormwater Division. The question is, why do we sample our storm drain network and not perform the whole thing? Mere thing is cost. It would. We have over 700 miles of pipe that in our network, and normal production rate is about 10 to 15 miles per year that we have a consultant do. And we did a business risk score to identify which of those are the highest priority, and that's the ones that we focus on.
So in other words, you just never you'll never catch up on that cycle, right?
Yeah, and there's some pipe that are considered low risk, so maybe you don't want to go out and do those right now anyway. So we figure out which ones are considered a high risk, and then we'll go out and assess those, a little sample.
And then when you do a storm drain condition assessment, exactly what does that entail, and what's the difference?
For a storm drain, it would be a vehicle with a remote control camera on it that parks over a manhole cover to access the system. They would stick a remote control camera down. It would run along the system and video capture anything, and they would identify any defects in the pipe, and there's an accumulation score of so many defects in a pipe result in a certain structural score deficiency. So it's a slow process, but it's the best way to assess an underground system.
Okay. And then what about the above ground storm channels and those type of things? Is that just a visual walkthrough? Because I know in most everything drains into Mission Valley, which is District 7, and there's several stormwater runoff channels that are in dire need of upkeep and maintenance, and I haven't noticed. It seems like about every 10 years somebody goes through there.
Yeah, those can be done visually. We also have a assessment being performed in our canyon outfalls. Those are one of those elements of our infrastructure that when they fail, it's quite expensive and very high liability to the city. So we're actually in an effort right now to go visually inspect all of those canyon outfalls. So that is done visually.
Okay. And then lastly, on the transfers from the deferred capital bond number 1, the leftover monies, is that in interest, those type of thing? Does that money go project specific, or does it kind of get sorted around? Is that money just sitting in the bank, or how does that money get moved
Currently,
around?
there's a little over $5 million left. It is sitting in projects that we're trying to complete and finish up.
But they're specified for projects. It can't be taken and moved into other, general fund or whatever type monies.
Within the annual, yes, it can't be moved into other funds. Within the annual allocation for those types of projects is where it'll stay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to make a motion? Or? We do need a motion to adopt the staff recommendation. Okay. Ms. Leitner.
Second, send to council, whatever, right? Approve staff recommendation. I did have additional questions, and that was because we had Mr. Matter talk about stormwater. And I'm just curious, you use the same sort of system for the sewer? You run something on a track? Is that would a wheeled device?
Speaking for our drain system, it is a similar machine, but it's a different one. We do not, I'm kind of biased to our storm drain system, but we don't allow our contractor or consultant to use anything that's already been in the sewer system.
No, that's not what I meant.
Okay.
That's not what I meant.
But
Similar.
it's the same equipment.
Same
yeah.
one.
A lot of
apologize.
consultants will have a sewer truck and a drain truck, and they're the same.
And I'm sure the EPA appreciated your clarification there. I'm curious as to, a lot of times the drain pipes actually collect a lot of debris. How does that work? Is that problematic or not for the inspections?
Yeah, there are some pipes that have accumulated debris in them where the camera cannot fully pass those, and those are noted as needing maintenance, and then we'll have our crews go out and clean those up, and then we'll reassess them as the machines can go through.
That's very good. Thank you. Glad I could introduce a little bit of levity here. And then the other question I had, when you're doing the facilities assessment, I note that Real Estate Assets Department is coming up with a plan as to what to do with some of our of some of our facilities? And is there a coordination going on with your department and real estate assets to actually combine forces on this?
Yes, there is. Yeah, we'll be coordinating our efforts with real estate assets.
No problem at all. Mr. Matter, if you find a couple of baseballs in Rancho Bernardo, my 7-year-old would like them back. Keep going down the drains there. So, gentlemen, when I look at the so-called cascade list of projects from the fiscal year 13 CIP budget, we've got underfunded project list. It's, I think, table 19, and it's got a list of, it looks like about 10 projects that were prioritized. And the top 3 are actually pretty small. There's a Wynwood 2 mini park play area upgrade for $42,000. There's Mission Trails Regional Park comfort station, and for $104,000, and a Mission Bay Athletic Area comfort station modernization for $320,000. Since those are relatively small, and we can have this discussion at a later meeting on how those got prioritized so highly, would it be in order to have those included, or is there a reason not to include them with this this $30 million that we're going to take to the full council next week?
The $30 million or the project savings on bond number 1, which
either one.
The assets are eligible for this financing. There's nothing about it. But on the deferred capital side, we do have this $898 million backlog. It's storm drains, it's facilities, it's streets. So anytime we dip into this funding pool and spend it on a different asset, then the problem we run into is the transparency issue, is that we're not really drawing down where we've led the public to believe that we are. So, but on the $30 million is an interesting question, because that's not deferred capital. Right. That they would be eligible. They would be competing against the stormwater BMPs, and I don't think it is entirely up to council on that, but I think the $25 million is already spoken for. And that, I'll let you guys fight that out. But on the $5 million side, is that what staff would be bringing forward is an argument that we feel that the stormwater BMP issue is very important. But those other projects in the Cascade list would be eligible.
Okay, great. Question for Lakshmi and debt management. Could the number be more than 30? Is it limited to 30 for some financial reason?
It comes down to affordability on the debt service side. To the extent every $1 million is added, there is a fixed debt service cost associated with that. So fiscal year 14 budget has an implication. Any additional borrowing is added to that request. We have docketed for next week. The actual ordinance has a not to exceed $31.1 million to generate $30 million. To the extent there is a change there, it will have an effect on the debt service.
Okay. And what is your rule of thumb for every, I remember you told me this once before, for every $10 million we borrow on the lease revenue bonds, what's the amount of debt service to the general fund?
Depends on, obviously, interest rates. These would be fixed rate bonds, and right now we are at a very low point, and based on the current rates, just a rule of thumb could be $10 million would have about $700,000 in annual impact for the next 30 years.
For 30 years. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I guess we, I was just wondering if the council decided next week that there were more projects, for example, easy projects, not easy, but easy in the pipeline projects, such as streets, roads, asphalt streets, concrete streets, et cetera, that were relatively good to go in terms of having the scope and project design done, if there would be a reason to not bump that number up a little bit, just to hasten some of these projects. Not substantially, but just a little bit. Okay. Guess I'll just leave that out there for right now. Okay, so let's see here. Going back to the $75 million on the second bond for a second. So we've encumbered or spent about $20 million, if I remember from the report, and we got that money last summer.
We received the proceeds, I believe it was August
okay.
last year.
Okay, so we've obligated about almost a quarter of it in 6 to 7 months. Is that an improvement over the speed at which we did it in the first bond?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because and that's showing the improvement that we made over the last few years. With the first deferred bond, as Darren mentioned, we started at a standing start. We had no designs in place. We hadn't done any of the permitting on those projects. We're still trying to figure out at that time what projects to put into the bond program. So that put us way behind the curve. But with the second bond, we're picking up the pace, and with the third bond, we'll get even better as years go on. But the goal should be to use the succeeding year's bond proceeds to fund construction projects. So you want to have enough projects designed, sitting on the shelf ready to go, so that when you get those bond proceeds, then you can go right into construction with the majority of them.
Okay, great, thank you. And you said that the work on that third round would be this spring. It would obviously come to this committee and then to the full council. Right. And when would you be actually looking for that to become, for us to go out on that bond?
We're still working with debt management on that. We're looking at how we draw down bond number 2. And as you said, we made progress on that. Best guess, we're talking about project lists put together in the spring, start working with debt management to go forward with the bond measures this summer, setting the stage for us to get funding probably later in the fall or winter in place for the next wave of projects. Because there is a timeline, a series of actions it takes to get money in place. And that's so. Okay.
Absolutely. We collaborate very closely with Public Works on a monthly basis, tracking the actual spend down encumbrance trends on the existing bond issue, which is a $75 million issued in summer last year. And it's a spend down as it relates to, the actual spend down, not just encumbrance. That's really the IRS guideline, expenditures of the bond proceeds. And working very closely with Public Works, ensuring that by the time the critical mass of the bond 2 is spend down, we would be gearing up, giving it a 6-month give or take. So you would be looking at 6 months ahead of the 100% spend down of the DC2, the deferred capital bond 2. We would gear up and begin the process on the approvals with the City Council.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lakshmi. So this committee might expect to be involved in that process in the April, May, June timeframe, give or take?
I think the first step is we'll be bringing you a project list.
Okay.
And then making sure that everybody's on the same page and we're in agreement that these are the projects. And as Darren was trying to point out in his presentation, you should be seeing a mix of projects, those that we're designing today in bond number 2, that you should be seeing construction requests for construction dollars on that list, but then also seeing new projects being put on there, not to fully finance them for construction, but to finance their planning, their design costs to get them going for bond number 4. And then that's how we sort of start, why we keep saying you're starting to take a program look at this. And of course what we would be looking for is that if we commit design dollars, then we're committed to construction dollars at a later date and follow through with that. So.
Makes sense. Okay, good. And when you come back with the third bond, can you bring back an updated 5-year financing plan for the deferred capital?
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate. Probably what we'll do is come back not only for the third bond, but also give you an idea of what bond number 4 and 5 should look like. May not have complete project lists, but at least categories and number of dollars for streets and things of that nature.
Okay.
We can do that.
Great. Yeah, I think that getting that stronger commitment from the council is really is going to be critical, and also allowing us to apply best cash management practices to some of those earlier points makes sense as well. So thank you very much, gentlemen. We have a motion by Mr. Sherman. Did we have a second on that?
Yes.
We did have a second. Thank you, Ms. Leitner. To approve item 5 and forward it to the full council. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. All opposed, none. With Ms. Emerald absent, that passes unanimously. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation here today. We will see you on March 18th, bright and early, 9 a.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.